It's my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I am your host for tonight, Mary Jane Calderon, joining you from my office at Behringer-Crawford Museum. Also joining me by the power of Zoom is my co-host for the evening, Heather Cook, and our lovely presenter, Jeannine Kreinbrink. So thank you ladies both for joining me. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's history museum, that would not be possible without support. Thank you to all of our sponsors, including the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. Foundation, and our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining for access to discounts and exclusive programming. Learn more and join at bcmuseum.org. We would love to hear from our viewers tonight, so if you have a question or comment to share, please type it in the chat or Q&A feature, and we will be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. Let's meet tonight's presenter. Tonight's speaker is no stranger to Northern Kentucky History Hour. Jeannine Kreinbrink is the president and senior partner at KNV Cultural Resources Management, LLC, which she co-founded in 2011 with Doug Von Stroh. She has combined a career in cultural resource management with conducting educational and public programs in archaeology, preservation, and history. Her archaeology career began at NKY, volunteering at BCM, where she has been associate archaeologist since 1981. She began a full-time career as an archaeologist in 1986, working on urban archaeology in Covington. Jeannine obtained her master's in 1992 from the University of Cincinnati and has worked as a professional archaeologist ever since. Jeannine serves on the board of directors for the Friends of Big Bone. She helped found and served on the board of the James A. Ramage Civil War Museum, and also taught as an adjunct professor to the anthropology and history departments at Northern Kentucky University from 1997 to 2014. Currently, she serves as the registrar for the Register of Professional Archaeologists. So thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Now, if we can go ahead and stop sharing our screen, we'll go ahead and let Jeannine share her screen. And we'll go over the quiz question. So if anyone's new to Northern Kentucky History Hour, we do a quiz question during all of our presentations. And the first respondent to enter a correct answer in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live wins a Northern Kentucky History Hour prize, and most importantly, bragging rights. So tonight's question is, William Clark dug up 3 Clovis paleo spear points in 1807. Where are they now? So go ahead and get those responses entered on Facebook and on Zoom, and we will get to those shortly and we'll have a winner. And Jeannine, if you're ready, you can go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you, Mary Jane. I'm so happy to be back on History Hour. And tonight we're going to talk about Big Bone Lick State Historic Site and its importance in Northern Kentucky and United States and even the world, but we're going to focus on United States tonight. And we're going to talk about the different accolades and honors and lists Crawford is included, or that Big Bone Lick is included on. And you might think, well, if you have one, like National Register, why would you need other ones? But the thing is that they're all different. Each one focuses on a different significance at Big Bone. And the list right now is that we have 4 here for Big Bone Lick. And the first one is the National Register of Historic Places. And Big Bone was first listed on this in 1972. We're going to talk more about each one of these this evening. The park was also listed on the Lewis and Clark National Trail in 2002. It became a National Natural Landmark in 2009, and we are in final review with the National Park Service for National Historic Landmark status this summer as we speak, and we will talk more about that tonight also. So the first one we're going to talk about is the National Register of Historic Places. So it was first nominated in 1972, and then the nomination was expanded in 2002 as additional property was bought around the park, and also to expand the context why it was significant, to include more of the archaeological sites as well as the geological and paleontological components at the park. So let's back up a minute and talk about the National Register of Historic Places. What is the National Register? Well, it's officially a list of properties that are significant on a local, regional, or national level. It could be just local as well as regional or national. It was authorized by the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, and it's part of a national program to coordinate and support public and private efforts to identify, evaluate, and protect America's historic and archaeological resources. And the list of properties in the National Register are held and monitored and approved by the National Park Service. To be eligible to be listed on the National Register, there are 4 criteria that you evaluate the property against. All right. The first one, and these are essentially questions, right? So the first one is the property associated with events, activities, or developments that were important in the past? And I bolded this one because Big Bone Lick fits under this criterion, and we'll come back to that. Is it associated with the lives of people who were important in the past? And it is, but it not, they kind of fall under A. Is it associated with significant architectural history, landscape history, or engineering significance? And it doesn't really fall under that. And D, does it have the potential to yield information through archaeological investigation about our past? And this one is bolded because Big Bone Lick does fall under criterion D for all the archaeological sites that are present, as well as the paleontological collections. Now I got a lot of text here, but we'll work our way through it. So criterion A, association at Big Bone, is because of science and because of paleontology. Big Bone Lick played a very tangible role in the development of the science of vertebrate paleontology during the late 18th and early 19th century, and became a focus of study by naturalists and emerging geologists in America and Europe. And we're going to talk a lot more about this when we get to the section on the natural landmark status and the historic landmark status, because those are both more associated with this part of Big Bone. Big Bone is also eligible under criterion D because it has the capacity to provide significant information. Oops, hold on. Wait, one more slide. Significant information pertaining to the prehistoric and historic past of Northern Kentucky and the region. The most important for future research is the presence of archaeological deposits from every era of the human occupation of North America. And this is from the earliest Paleo-Indian of more than 12,000 years ago, all the way up through the historic time period in the 18th century. So the archaeological components are present from every time period. We know there are at least 5 sites with Paleo-Indian artifacts, 6 with Archaic time period artifacts, 5 with woodland, 11 with Fort Ancient, which is the late prehistoric from say 1000 AD up to at least the 1600s. Also from 18th to 19th century, and these sites are all associated, these 11 are associated with historic Euro-American settlement in the Big Bone Valley. There are other undefined archaeological components, of course, as well as the possibility and probability of deeply buried archaeological sites in the stratigraphy along. This map shows kind of a model of high and low densities of archaeological sites. Let me see if I can. There we go. Can you see the arrow? So here is the entrance. This is Route 338, where my arrow is going, Route 338. Here's the entrance to the park. And you can see that the whole valley is in the darker shades because that's where archaeological sites and archaeological artifacts have been found, and they kind of go up the slope somewhat. The visitor center and all of that is right on here. There's picnic shelters are over here. This is the road to the visitor center. And here's the visitor center right there. And the site up here in the back is because there is a 19th century homestead site out there behind the campground. And also there was one up here at this side of the campground. There's still a cemetery up there by the campground. So this shows the density of sites. And the paleontology excavations we'll talk to you about a little bit later are in where I'm kind of circling with the arrow, have pretty much all been down in this area. This blue is the creek. It's flowing in the direction I'm moving with the arrow. And then it goes down Boat Dock Road and eventually to the Ohio River. And this stream coming in from the north is called Gum Branch. And this confluence is where most of the mastodons and bison and other paleontological specimens have been found. Right, so the time periods that we have in the park: Paleo before 10,000 years ago, Archaic, a very long time, 7,000 years worth, from 10,000 to 3,000, Woodland, 3,000 years ago to about 1,000 years ago, and Fort Ancient, say 1,000 AD to less than 500 years ago, certainly up into the 1600s. Clovis and other similar spear points, including these three, are the oldest Paleo period points found in Northern Kentucky so far. Older sites have been found in other parts of the United States, but so far around here, Clovis are the oldest. William Clark excavated these three spear points at Big Bone Lick in 1807. We don't really know the context in which he found them. They were given to a person in Cincinnati, and then to a museum. They went to the what became the Art Museum, and they are now at the Cincinnati Museum Center. During the 18th century, we know and can document multiple historic period Indian visits, such as the Shawnee and other tribal visits to Big Bone Lick. In 1739, de Longueuil, who was a French soldier, was brought there by the Shawnee, and he recorded seeing, shelters made out of elephant tusks and finding the large bones, and he actually shipped some of them back to France. And in 1755, Mary Draper Ingalls is a well-documented case where she was brought there also by the Shawnee, and then escaped and walked all the way back home to West Virginia, or what would become West Virginia. And it took her from July till November to walk all the way back up the Ohio River, back to her home. So even in the 18th century, we have documented visits. Now, Charles Lemoyne de Longueuil, he was a baron later on, but he was a military man. And this map actually is from 1744, and it is based on his visit. It says 1729, but that's wrong. It's 1739. And they first visited Big Bone Lick in 1739. They were traveling from Fort Niagara in Canada down to New Orleans. And so they were going down the Ohio River. And de Longueuil was in charge of this contingent of soldiers, and they were being guided by various Native Americans. And his and other early reports spurred an intense interest in the mysterious bones that seem like stone or rock. I mean, we know now they're fossilized, and they were being sent to the Eastern United States and from there on to Paris and to London during this early time period. This map is from 1744, and this is a little tiny piece of it that I have enlarged. And where it says here in French, where you can see the word elephant in with the green arrow pointing to it, it translates to the place where elephant bones were found. So we have it documented on a map, and the squiggles on the map don't necessarily match, what it looks like right now, but the consensus is that this is actually a map of Big Bone. And we also know that the native tribesmen were also still hunting bison. They're in probably the 18th century, maybe a little bit earlier than that. In 2008, Cincinnati Museum Center excavated a site right down in, you can see from this photograph, along Big Bone Creek. And they found a kill site. So they found multiple bison at this location who had been butchered. And they also found tools. This stone tool up here in the corner was found in with the bones. They did radiocarbon date on them, and it turns out that they are modern. And radiocarbon dating only really works for something that's older than about 500 years. Well, that would take us right back to 18th century to 1500s, 1600s. And from other excavations and from paleontological work, we know that the bison that were at Big Bone, say 10,000 years ago, disappeared from this part of the Midwest and Ohio, northern Kentucky, for almost 10,000 years. There's no evidence archaeologically of bison again until we get to about the late 1400s. And then they start to show up in archaeological sites again. And I think, and a lot of people think that as the tribes were clearing land and planting corn, and there were more pasture areas and open areas and almost like a plains environment in some parts of this region, the bison came back. And they certainly came back to Big Bone. And we have the evidence of it here from this archaeological dig. All right. So for the National Register of Historic Places, Big Bone Lick is significant, one, because of the Native American Indian occupation for at least 12,000 years. And so that's the human element and the archaeological element. And it's also significant under criterion A because it is associated with the development of vertebrate paleontology and also for the broad pattern of human occupation. So that's the National Register. And then we're going to move on to the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, which Big Bone became a part of in 2002. And this is because of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. So the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail winds nearly 4,900 miles through the homelands of more than 60 tribal nations. It follows the historic outbound and inbound routes of Lewis and Clark from 1803 to 1806 from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to the Pacific Ocean and then back to St. Louis. And then William Clark, at least, then came back to Kentucky and ended up at Big Bone in 1806. So in 1803, as they were setting out, after Lewis had left Pittsburgh, and he was on his way down the Ohio River to meet up with William Clark in Louisville, which was where William Clark was living. He visited Big Bone Lick at the request of Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson wanted Lewis to gather fossilized bones for him, which he did for some period of time in 1803. And he tried to ship them to Jefferson, but they sunk in the river. We don't know where. Nobody knows what happened to them, but anything that Lewis had collected in 1803 was lost. So here's William Clark and Meriwether Lewis. So in 1803, Lewis met a man named William Goforth and collected fossils, and they were lost. 1806, 1807, Clark, when he got back, he ended up back at Big Bone, supervising the first organized excavation of fossils on American soil, and he had better luck. He sent at least 300 specimens to Thomas Jefferson, and these are photographs of some of them that were taken at Drexel University, which now houses the American Academy of Science that Thomas Jefferson was a part of. So Drexel University in Philadelphia now has charge of all the Jefferson collection, as they call it. And these are pictures of some of those that they have provided to us. So the inclusion of Big Bone on the Lewis and Clark Trail is highly significant because it connects the beginning and the end of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Jefferson and others had hopes that they were going to actually find elephants alive out west. They were all still learning, what extinction meant. There was still a huge debate as to what had the animals gone extinct. Large philosophical discussions going on all around Europe and in the United States at this time. So they thought they might see some of these animals still alive, and certainly bison out west, and recognized that some of bones that they were seeing were from bison. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, how they knew that these were elephants, but we'll get to that. So that's why the Lewis and Clark honor is so significant. So let's move on to the National Natural Landmark. And Dr. John Rockaway, who's retired now, but at NKU, and I were contacted, this is 2009, I want to say maybe 2006, maybe, give or take, by the Park Service. And we were asked if we wanted to work on a National Natural Landmark, that they had been looking for sites that they thought could qualify in our region. And Big Bone was one of the sites. And so we worked on this for several years and submitted the final version in fall of 2008. And it was awarded in early 2009. And we had a dedication at the park, and there's now a sign out at the entrance. So one of the significant things about the National Natural Landmark is that there are only 602 of them in the United States. So they're in 48 states. And the bottom's cut off, so it says and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So American Samoa, Guam, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and 48 other states have national natural landmarks. And so Big Bone, we're honored for Big Bone to be one of those. And the National Natural Landmark is bestowed on areas that are determined to be the best examples of a biological or geological feature within a given natural region. This national significance is determined through the application of the following criteria. It has to have the right conditions, diversity, rarity, and value for science and education. And you have to evaluate them by comparing them to sites in the same region. Here's a map of Kentucky. And of course, we're right up there at the very top. So we evaluated Big Bone in comparison to Mastodon State Historic Site in Jefferson County, Missouri, McGinnity Peccary Cave, which is in Crawford County, Indiana, and the Prairie Creek site, which is also in Indiana. These are comparable sites that had stratigraphic collections of extinct Pleistocene animals. The Big Bone was originally identified way back in 1978 in a regional study called Potential Ecological and Geological Natural Landmarks on the Interior Low Plateau, and that's our geographic region as a potential site. Dr. Richard Davis from College of Mount St. Joe in Cincinnati had also sent in a recommendation to the National Park Service several decades, probably in the 1980s, recommending Big Bone as well. Big Bone is famous, of course, for the saline and mineral springs that are found along the stream valley, and especially near the confluence with Gum Branch, as I showed you on the map earlier. The primary springs lay within an approximately 80-acre part of the stream valley, so from the main entrance over toward Boat Dock Road. These are surrounded by buried layers of fossilized bones that date to the Pleistocene period. They're deeply buried in the blue clay silt, and you can see over here, here's the bluish gray plastic clay, and below the yellowish brown silt we have bones, fossil over here, more fossil bones in zone C over here, and some fossil bones over in this part of the profile. Oops, back. Okay. Erosion along the banks of Big Bone Creek and Gum Branch over the centuries has exposed these buried layers. As the banks are eroded, the fossils become exposed and visible at the surface. Seasonal flooding had often removed the fossil bones from the banks and redistributed them along the floodplain or the terrace surfaces along the creek. The interbedded limestone and shale formations in this region are sedimentary formations that were deposited in the shallow saltwater seas during the late Ordovician period. And the deposits of saline water that lie below these foundations can range from 50 to over 2,000 feet below the current land surface. Around the Big Bone Valley, that salt water is about 100 feet deep below the major valley bottoms, and is created by water flowing through the underlying Ordovician limestone, where trapped salts are dissolved, and then that is carried up to the surface. And if you walk around in the park, excuse me, you can see some of these salt and mineral springs that are still visible, and you can smell the sulfur in some of them as you walk the trails. These are pictures provided by the Kentucky Geological Survey, and these are actually photographs of some of the fossils at Drexel University, so they are part of the Jefferson collection. We have a ground sloth, claw, mammoth tooth, mastodon teeth, ground sloth skull, stag moose antler, and a bison skull from Bison antiquus, which is the extinct bison. Now with this image, you have to kind of pretend that the mountains in the background are the hills around Big Bone, but the terrain, the vegetation kind of gives you some idea of what it may have looked like in the valley at that time, with all the different types of animals and what types of animals lived at Big Bone during this time period. We see some of them in the picture here, with 3 different kinds of creatures, 2 different kinds of mammoths, and the American mastodon, of course. 2 different kinds of giant ground sloth, Jeffersons and Harlans. Harlan was a scientist who defined that species, so it's named for him. Several types of bison, and a large muskox called Butherium bomifrons also lived in the Big Bone Valley. And this includes bison, which is the modern version of the bison. Horses lived here for over 10,000 years ago, but disappeared until the Spanish brought them back. So there's at least 1 or 2 horse bones that have been found at Big Bone, tapirs, and a very large moose called the stag moose, whose antlers could get probably 6 or 8 feet wide. So the National Natural Landmark focuses on the paleontology deposits. It is focused on what's actually there, that there are preserved fossil remains and skeletons of all of these extinct animals that are found together, and the scientific studies of the soil and the salt and mineral springs. And so as the National Natural Landmark, this highlights the significance of what is actually there, what has been found there in terms of geology and paleontology. Not necessarily the human component of it, either the historical or the Native American, but the what's actually there. Okay, so we need to move on. All right, so that brings us to the 4th one, and that's the one that I'm working on right now. And we have been working on actually for quite a few years, is the National Historic Landmark, which is in review with the National Park Service. And properties shall be designated National Historic Landmarks if they are nationally significant. So a National Historic Landmark has to be nationally significant, unlike, say, the National Register, which can be local or regional. For the historic landmark, you are in comparison with other sites on a national stage. There are 6 general criteria. I'm not going to go through them all. We're going to talk about number 1, which is why Big Bone is significant. They're associated with events that have made a significant contribution to and are identified with, or that outstandingly represent, broad national patterns of United States history, and from which an understanding and appreciation of those patterns may be gained. Okay, so why does Big Bone fit? Well, Big Bone Lick fits because it is widely referred to as the birthplace of vertebrate paleontology. And vertebrate paleontology are the study of extinct animals with skeletons, right? Vertebrate means with an internal skeleton. So it is eligible under criterion 1 because of the, I'm going to read this so I get it right, the unique significance and major contributions that fossils from the site have made toward the development of paleontology as a science, both nationally and internationally, in the late 18th and early 19th century. Not only has this location long been considered a world-class collection site for large Pleistocene epoch mammal fossils, which is circa 2.6 million years ago to 11,700 years before present. And at Big Bone, it's mostly in the last 30,000 years. It is also the first nationally recognized site for fossil collection from which the fossils were scientifically studied. Big Bone Lick has been referred to as the birthplace of vertebrate paleontology in North America, and has had immense importance in the early studies of geology and vertebrate paleontology, and the relationship as developing scientific fields in the United States and the world. So they played a significant role in the, especially late 18th century, in the development of scientific thought regarding the idea of extinction. And the fossil beds at Big Bone Lick have produced type specimens for at least 4 Pleistocene epoch mammals, the mastodon itself, the stag moose, I think the tapir, at least 2 other ones. And it influenced many of the most important scientific minds of the period, including Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, George Cuvier, Charles Lyell, and later on Nathaniel Southgate Shaler. Move on. So I've highlighted 3 time periods here in the study of the history of paleontology. So it began in the 18th century with the collection of fossils by French explorers and other expeditions. It became linked to exploration and expansion because the fossil collections contributed to the ideas of extinction, the changing climate through time, and previously unidentified animal species. Explorations into new territories, including Kentucky and Big Bone, collected fossils, plants, and animals during this time period. So in the 1940s, a man named George Gaylord Simpson studied the history of paleontology, and he divided it into 6 time periods, and they're listed here. And so we had to look back and figure out, well, where does Big Bone Lick fit in? In which of these time periods was Big Bone Lick the most significant? How did it contribute the most in these time periods? And the first 3, the pre-scientific period prior to 1762, the proto-scientific period up to 1799, and the pioneer scientific period up to 1842 are the most important at Big Bone. So the first pre-scientific period, which is prior to 1762, and these dates are very specific because several of them, like 1762, refers to a paper that was read at essentially a conference in London, and that paper was about Big Bone. And the 1899 date or 1799 date on the second time period is a paper that George Cuvier in Paris read that also referred to Big Bone. So Big Bone's a natural fit in here. So in this first time period, obviously we have Deslongay in 1739, other people sending fossils to Paris and to London. Benjamin Franklin became involved during this early time period where he was paying people to collect fossils, Hold on. For example, there's a 1756 report by a French scientist named Guittard. Is an early published reference that includes a drawing, 2 molars, 2 very large teeth, and this is an image of that drawing, identified as being from Big Bone Lick, and they may be the first illustration of a vertebrate fossil from North America. And it was from Big Bone. So it's all very exciting. The proto-scientific period, and that's Cuvier, a painting of Cuvier, and a mastodon molar that he drew in 1806. It starts in 1762 when a man named Dalbinton read a paper on American fossils, treating them for the first time in what deserves to be called a scientific way. it wasn't a true science, paleontology wasn't, but he was inventing the basic methods. They were working on, how do you compare fossils? How do you decide how they're different? Are they different species or are they the same species? And this generated a lively debate. And so Dawiton's paper in 1762 is the beginning of this period. And he compared a fossil, a femur bone, an upper leg bone, sent to France by de Longueuil from Big Bone with those from Siberia and Africa, marking an early use of the comparative method of fossil identification. And this is one of the 4 basic principles of vertebrate paleontology. The other 3 are that fossils may and usually do represent extinct species. They occur in definite temporal sequence, and they record evolutionary phylogenies or different trajectories of species. They're all very important things that were being developed at this time period. There are multiple papers between 1762 and 1790s that talk about big bone fossils and illustrate various fossils. And in 1796, Cuvier gave first of one of his papers where he talks about big bone. Okay. Third time period is the pioneer time period, 1799 to 1842. In 1799, the first technical study by an American, a man named Wistar, was published. In Europe, this was the epic of Cuvier, who organized the subject as a true and defined science, largely based on big bone fossils. A man named Harlan, remember we saw the Harlan's ground sloth, and others in America applied Cuvier's methods and theories to increasingly large collection of fossils. The ending date of 1842 is arbitrary, and Simpson kind of chose that because it was an even century from when he started it in his history. But it also marked the end of Harlan's career and preceding the beginning of a man named Leidy, who was like the next generation of actual, people called paleontologists. Fossils from big bone were still highly significant during this time period. This is the time period when Wistar and Harlan were comparing and defining new species, especially based on ones from Big Bone Lick, including Harlan's ground sloth. Cuvier first identified the the mastodon as a separate species in 1806 and defined it and called it Mammut americanum, or the American mastodon. Thomas Jefferson was highly significant during this time period. He was president of the American Philosophical Society from 1797 to 1814. He encouraged the study of vertebrate paleontology, and it became a key part of the Philosophical Society's mission, was to go out and collect fossils. This is Caspar Wistar. He was a physician and an anatomist. He succeeded Jefferson as president of the American Philosophical Society, and he published many, many papers, including here is a muskox that he also defined. Here's Sir Charles Lyell. Richard Harlan is the guy on the left. Sir Charles Lyell is the man on the right. He was a European geologist, highly significant person. He visited Big Bone in 1841 with the Kentucky State geologist David Dale Owen. In his report on his travels to America, Lyell referred to Big Bone as, quote unquote, a place of great geological celebrity. Harlan was a physician, was a leading expert on fossil vertebrates from the 1830s until he died in 1843. He was probably the first career vertebrate paleontologist. He is the one who defined Butherium bombifrons and also the stegmoose. So this slide are just some of the institutions and places around the world and the country that have collections from Big Bone. Of course, at Big Bone, Behringer-Crawford, of course, has a great collection. Cincinnati Museum Center, Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, now at Drexel University, Monticello. And it's funny because for a long time, I thought that the bones at Monticello had been there the whole time from Jefferson on. And it turns out that they're actually on loan from the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. So University of Nebraska, the Smithsonian, Harvard, Yale, Marietta College, I'm not sure why, the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, which is Cuvier's collection, and also the British Museum in London. And a lot of the fossil bones at the British Museum are there because of Benjamin Franklin, who had sent many bones there. And that's all I've got. That's the end.
Well, thank you so much, Jeannine, for such a great presentation. Before we go over our trivia winner, if anyone has any questions for Jeannine, please type them now in the Q&A or in the chat feature or on Facebook Live if you're joining us on Facebook. I did see we had one question, but if anybody else has any questions, please get them in there. And then I'm going to turn it over to you, Heather. Let's see who won our trivia. Well, let's go over the question again.
Yeah, the question was, William Clark dug up 3 Clovis paleo spear points in 1807, and where are they now? And that answer did come in like right away as soon as we asked the question. It was the Cincinnati Museum Center, and Cindy and Woody Schuster won that. Got it.
Yay, Cindy and Woody.
Yeah, so congratulations to them. You'll be getting your prize in the mail shortly.
Okay, we want to go ahead. I did see that we had one question.
Yes. And that was, were some big bone areas more potable than others and others not?
Yeah, were some area creeks potable and others not?
Oh, Big Bone Creek itself is fresh water. So I guess technically, certainly back in the day, people would have drunk the water from the creek itself. The salt and mineral springs come up at different spots, so they're not directly connected to the creek. And if they do go into the creek, you can see because it colors the water differently. So I mean, even the salt and mineral water, you can drink it, I guess, if you want to. I mean, people used to, right? There were 2 hotels out there with spas where people would go out and take the water because they thought that it had health benefits. Are the salt licks still used by animals today? I expect they probably are. The deer certainly that wander out there would probably use it. And somebody said, are there bison out there now? The park does have a bison herd. In fact, they just had a baby bison not too long ago. So you can go out and visit. It's out beyond the visitor center, from the end of the visitor center parking lot. You can walk back to see the bison.
Somebody else asked, why does Drexel have their collection? What is the connection to Jefferson?
Jefferson donated his collection to the Philosophical Society that he was the president of for 15 years, and it existed for a very long time. And then at some point, Drexel University took over the care and maintenance of their collections. Drexel is in Philadelphia. And so they absorbed it into the university so that it wouldn't go away. So they have preserved that collection. And all of Jefferson's fossils are cataloged together and kept as the Jefferson collection at Drexel.
We do have a couple questions on Facebook Live as well. The first one is asking what animals besides woolly mammoth have been found.
Let me go back. So there's the Columbian mammoth, the woolly mammoth, and then the mastodon, of course, and two different kinds of giant ground sloths, horse, tapirs, stag moose, and the bison antiquus, which is the extinct version of the modern bison, but there are modern bison there too. And of course, lots of smaller mammals and animals. The interesting, if you think about all the animals that I just named, they're all herbivores, right? There are no, like say, saber-toothed cats or bears or other predators those bones have not been found at Big Bend. And it's actually led some archaeologists recently to speculate, well, maybe the bones got there because they were killed and butchered by the native tribes, you know, going back to Paleo when they would have been there while with the extinct animals were still there, because we obviously have a historic bison kill site. But if it was just natural, where say the animals are out there in the mud flats and the salt and mineral spring and they get stuck, which was the old theory, is that they got trapped in the muck and died, wouldn't you also find the predators getting stuck as well? If you've heard of the La Brea tar pits out in Los Angeles, that's chock full of predators. There's saber-toothed tigers and all kinds of animals, as well as, you know, the mastodon, the mammoth, and all that. We don't have those at Big Bend. So people are starting to rethink how the animals got there. You know, how did those skeletons and bones get into the ground so that they could be turned into fossils? So it's all very interesting. Lots of good research still to be done.
Someone else was asking if there are any other locations in northern Kentucky that have these types of bones.
Yes, and my brain just went completely blank. Blue Lick battlefield site over south of Maysville has produced extinct Pleistocene fossils. Not in the same quantities, but then it hasn't been investigated, I don't think, as much. So yes, but other than that, not in large quantities. Now, if you go along the Ohio River, every so often they pull them out of some of the gravel beds when they're quarrying sand and gravel along the river. They do pull fossils out of those. So they're here, they're just hiding.
We have another question asking who owned the land before the state park bought it.
There were multiple private landowners, a couple of larger ones, and then it got divided up through the 19th century as properties got divided. There's one report, 1831, a guy named Constantine Rafinesque, who taught at Transylvania College in Lexington. He went to visit Big Bend in 1831, and he said that the landowners had chased off the people wanting to dig bones because they kept digging big holes where they were trying to farm. So we know that there were people living there who were actually farming the land. There were some early attempts at using it to make salt, but it's not salty enough to make that a go. So it was private landowners. And in the 1950s, a man named Bruce Ferguson, who had been judge executive in Boone County for a long time, and several other local historians, they started raising money, and they bought the land right around the springs, like where Gum Branch and Big Bone Creek meet, and they gave it to the state to make a state park. And but that was in the late 1950s, and I think the official date for the park is like 1960, give or take. So yeah, it was all farmland before that.
We also had a follow-up question on the which animals are there besides woolly mammoths, and they were asking if there are pterodactyls there.
I mean, a dinosaur?
I guess.
No. There are no dinosaur bones in this part of Kentucky because, well, one, we were probably underwater. That's why we have all the little fossils, right? The brachiopods and bryozoa and all the smaller fossils are there from the ancient seas. And then once those seas were gone, this area uplifted, and it's called the Cincinnati Arch. And all that other soil eroded away. And so the soil on our fossils and our limestone that's so close to the ground surface is older than the rocks that are, say, in Louisville or past Maysville upriver. So it's like this dome rose up, and anything younger than that eroded away. And it stopped eroding and started building back up again in the Pleistocene, and that's why we have Pleistocene fossils. That's a really short, simple explanation for something really complicated, but we kind of go from young dirt to very old with nothing in between. Now, if you go way west in Kentucky, all the way to the Mississippi, there are dinosaur bones over there because they have the dirt that's in between, if that makes sense. Or out west, you know, go to Montana. There's dinosaurs everywhere out there.
It's very interesting. I think that might be, is that all of our questions, Heather?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, timing is good then.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Jeannine,
Very
for
welcome.
sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. You've been great. Let's go ahead and share our screen, Heather, and get to let everybody know what's going on at the museum right now. So we still have our Dancing with Nature on display. It's a wildlife photography exhibit of the natural world in Northern Kentucky through the lens of Kira McNeil, featuring herons, starlings, deer, butterflies, spiders, and more. The photographs are all framed with salvaged, repurposed wood from old structures on her farm. It's very cool. The exhibit will be on display through August 13th, so check that out. Also on display is our Art of Fashion, Faye Applegarth Maddox, featuring one-of-a-kind illustration and advertising in the local newspapers by a Northern Kentucky fashion plate artist. The elaborate drawings were used for Reeds of Hyde Park, McAlbin's, and other sports or stores in our area. Our next Music at BCM concert is tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock with the Northern Kentucky Music Legends. A decade and 65 inductees later, the Northern Kentucky Music Legends are returning to Behringer-Crawford Museum to showcase Northern Kentucky's exceptional talent. So we have Ray Cummins, along with other first-year inductees, the band Strange Brew, Jerry Gifford, Mike Meredith, Now Hey Bartender, Bobby Mackey, and more will perform classic rock, country, and blues. So the doors open at 6. Please bring chairs or blankets for seating. In case of rain, we will move indoors. The following concert is going to be on August 3rd with Easy Tiger. So you can see the full, complete Music at BCM schedule on our website at bcmuseum.org. And then our next Chippy Sensational Kids Club, we want everybody to woof it up these last hot days of summer at Behringer-Crawford Museum. Preschoolers and their parents are invited Tuesday, August 15th at 11 to celebrate the long hot days of August with positively adoggable stories, barktacular crafts, and doggone fun activities inspired by man's best friend. That's $3 materials fee plus museum admission for each child. Register, please, at least 3 days in advance at 859-491-4003. Lastly, our next Northern Kentucky History Hour will be on Wednesday, August 9th with Jeannine Kreinbrink again, returning to present what is the National Registrar of Historic Places and how do cemeteries get listed. So please tune in for that. For more Northern Kentucky history throughout the week, check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel where you'll find the latest curators chat with all of our past Northern Kentucky History Hour presentation. Please like and subscribe. That's all that we have time for this evening. So thank you again to all of our sponsors and supporters of Behringer-Crawford Museum. Until then, take care, everyone, and good night.